Clay Travis, Buck Sexton Show. We are joined now by actor, author Kirk Cameron. Many of you, like me and Buck, and certainly producer Allie, big fans of Growing Pains back in the day.
No way.
Kirk, yes, loved the show. We'll get to that here in a sec. You got 6 kids. You are now traveling around the country doing story hours, and your books have turned into your children's books major cultural flashpoints. So, Kirk, thank you for being in our New York City studio. I'll start here. I'll give you a 2-parter to start. What percentage of people who come in for your book signings were big Growing Pains fans back in the day? And would you have ever believed back in the days when you were a teen idol that you would grow up and write children's books? Would that something that, if I had told you this in 1988, would you have ever believed this would be your career path?
Great questions, and totally unique. The guy that was standing outside of the Seattle Public Library was definitely a Growing Pains fan because he had a big sandwich board that he took a lot of time to make. It was huge, like 5 feet by 5 feet, that said, "You're growing into a real pain." That was so well played. Well done, sir. I know he was a huge fan. I'm glad we could entertain him back in the 80s. So many people there came and were, whether they were Growing Pains fans or not, they're fans of the values that led to the freest, strongest, most blessed and generous nation in the history of the world. And they're grateful to have something to be a part of, to offer their voice in the chorus of Americans that are against this woke machine. They want to deactivate the progressive matrix, and they want their children to have a future. And secondly, no, I never thought I'd be on the radio with Clay and Buck talking about children's books that I wrote, and would be traveling around the country to talk about things like love and joy, kindness, gentleness, and self-control.
So I have to ask you, Kirk, it's Buck now.
Hey, Buck.
Hey,
you know, I was a Buck. I was a Buck in a movie. You probably didn't know this. Yeah, it's an obscure little movie, but my name was Buck. Anyway, please.
It's a great name. It's
forgive
a strong,
me.
powerful, patriotic name.
It is.
So tell me this. You know, you just talked about what the books, you're writing children's books about things like love, kindness, decency, and bravery.
Very controversial. Be careful. Don't even say those words.
What is, and isn't it kind of crazy that in this day and age, whenever someone, I mean, I'm not the only one I'm sure who feels this way. Whenever we hear story hour, we're immediately thinking that it's a very different kind of story hour. Your story hour doesn't involve wigs, fishnet stockings, or any gender identity politics. And yet you're controversial. Explain how.
That's not fair. You can't explain that unless you go down the dark rabbit hole of where this is all headed by the progressives. And we could get into that, but you're right. I was denied by over 50 woke libraries when I asked to read this story for kids. Maybe if I dressed in fishnet stockings and heels, I wouldn't have had so many doors closed on me. But when we actually showed up at the Indianapolis Public Library, who told me in their response to my request, we're not interested, our values don't align with yours, our community doesn't want what you have to bring. Over 2,500 parents and grandparents and children overwhelmed 6 floors of this giant library. They went down the escalator, out the door, and into the parking lot. And these were parents who couldn't even get into the reading room because the one they gave us was so small. And we did reading room after reading room after reading room. And the ones that never got in didn't get upset. They didn't riot. They didn't break stuff and light stuff on fire. You know what they did? They started singing God Bless America and Amazing Grace in the hallways between the rows of books. And they started their own story hours for their children.
Kirk, you've got 6 kids. You live in California right now. I presume back in the day, Growing Pains was filmed in California, like many sitcoms would have been.
Yep.
I don't know if you had a political awakening of sorts. I'm curious, as you have evolved in your age, how difficult is it for you to stay in California, given what Gavin Newsom has done and what happened during COVID? I live in Nashville. Buck is in Miami. We have both in the state of Florida and in the state of Tennessee seen massive influxes of Californians, New Yorkers, people from the Chicago area who were just fed up. Have you come close to bailing on California? If not, why have you stayed?
Yeah, I understand the question. I meet many California refugees in Texas and Tennessee, Idaho, Florida, and from other states, New York and Michigan and Minnesota. We love California. God made a beautiful place with oceans and mountains and agricultural land. The weather's always nice, very little bugs or humidity. But I'm looking older, not because of age, but because of Gavin Newsom. And I want to stay on the front lines in the places where culture is heavily influenced. And if we don't do that, then really this stuff creeps all the way into the corners, and pretty soon Freedom Island will not be so free anymore. So I understand why people move, and I may be getting a bug out place somewhere, but I don't think I'm leaving California. We've hit rock bottom, and I think we can only go up from here.
We're speaking to Kirk Cameron, and his book is Pride Comes Before the Fall. Just tell us a little bit about that. I mean, a lot of parents out there who are looking for this kind of content for their kids or their grandkids. A lot of grandparents listening right now too. Yeah. Give us some of why this one and some of the other books you've written, are, you're the author. Why are they great content for kids? What are they going to learn?
Well, kids love to hear stories. They love heroes and they love fantasy worlds to enter into. And so that's what I did. I partnered up with Brave Books, which is a great American company who knows who they are and whose they are. They're not going to sell out. They're not turning away from their audience and their values like other big corporations have been doing lately. And we wrote a book about biblical wisdom and the fruit of the Spirit, and then followed it up with this second book right here. It's called Pride Comes Before the Fall, and it teaches children the importance of humility. Humility is a lost and priceless virtue that we've got to get back to. I mean, this is a perfect time for this book to be coming out. It's June. It's so-called Pride Month, and it's just in time for kids getting out of school and starting their summer reading programs. And it's interesting to me. If I could share this quick little story. I was walking down the street in New York City today, which, by the way, you guys are supposed to be here. I thought I was going to get to meet you in person. And I'm walking past Starbucks, and I see the rainbow-colored letters of pride and love and pride and love. We see it everywhere this month. Kids see this everywhere, and we are tempted to think that they go together. But the truth is, pride is the opposite of love. Love is about others. Pride is about self. So the truest expression of love is not pride, it's humility. But think of what just happened. The president of the United States, George Soros. Maybe that's sort
of
accurate. More accurate. Joe Biden raised the pride flag front and center on the White House. Did you know that George Washington, our first president, raised the humility flag? Look it up. He did. It said an appeal to heaven. And he raised that under his authority as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army in 1775. America was built on humility, not on pride. And I happened to call the White House this morning. I left a message for Joe Biden and recommended that if we really want to be a nation that's known for loving others well, we should replace the pride flag with the humility flag. We'll see if he calls me back.
I will be fascinated to hear. Maybe he was a big fan of Growing Pains back in the day, too. You mentioned the importance of staying in L.A., which is a center of culture in many ways. And I got a kind of a two-part question for you here to close out with, and we appreciate Kirk Cameron hanging out with us. If I think back to the shows that I watched as a kid with my family, with my parents, Family Ties, Growing Pains, Full House, Who's the Boss, Punky Brewster, The Cosby Show, that's just kind of a rough, I jotted them down as you were talking.
I love those shows.
I bet a huge percentage of our audience does too. Those shows were very much, I would say, apolitical, anti-woke. They also had an overall thematic connection about the importance of family relationships. Do you think those kind of shows could get made in Hollywood today is the first part. Second part, the most famous person now who ever appeared on Growing Pains is Leonardo DiCaprio. You have to be a hardcore Growing Pains fan to even remember that. Do you ever see DiCaprio around in L.A.? what do you think about his evolution in terms of his political beliefs? And were those kind of things apparent when you guys were young guys on a show like that?
Okay. So, Leonardo DiCaprio, has always been someone that we've cared so deeply about. My wife and I both on the show together with him. And the last time we saw each other was at Alan Thicke's funeral. And it was such a sad, but, anticipated reunion for those of us who were on the show together. And we love Leo, although I haven't talked to him in quite a while. I know he's busy with not movies and saving the rainforest and many other things that he's passionate about. So I really couldn't tell you from an inside perspective. I just read what you read in the internet as well. And your first question is, was it, why were shows apolitical?
Could you still make those shows, right? If you think back to all those that I laid out, you're talking about the impact of culture. We saw Fuller House came back. Could the Growing Pains reunion show exist? What do you think it was about the culture of the late 80s and the 90s that everybody seemed to kind of be pulling in the same direction, and now we're all going in different directions?
Because in the 80s and the 90s, and much more prior to that, in centuries before this, we had a common understanding of a Judeo-Christian ethic and society, a moral standard that we knew led to blessing. That was just common knowledge. It was in the water. It was in the air. The very first textbooks in education in America was the Bible. The Blueback Spellers, the New England Primer taught kids to spell by referencing the goodness of God, the faithfulness of God, the dangers of things like pride and selfishness and greed. So our TV shows, our culture reflected the things that we wanted. But even though today it's really not different, it's just all springing out of a different worldview. Politics are really inescapable. Religion is really inextricable from culture. And so even though we wouldn't have said Growing Pains was political or religious, it really was the manifestation of an early American Judeo-Christian view of life. Today, we have new pictures of family. We have new types of humor. We have different heroes and different villains. And that's driven by an ideological worldview. As you guys know, you talk about this all of the time. And the best way to advance those views, whether good or bad, whether free republics or socialist nations, is to bake it into the songs you sing, the TV shows you watch, and the books that you read to children. So, that's what we're seeing today. So yesterday's Growing Pains, looks a lot different today. And I think that if you put Growing Pains back on the air, just like many classic songs or classic movies, it would get labeled hate speech or bigotry. Even though, we understand that what masquerades as truth today is really stuffed with a lie. And that's why it's so important to me that we teach our kids these things before we reach the point of no return.
Latest book by Kirk Cameron is Pride Comes Before the Fall. Go to bravebooks.com to get this and his other book. And Kirk Cameron, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, guys.
Illuminating.
Appreciate you all. God bless you. Keep up the good work.
Good stuff indeed. Home insurance, car insurance, health insurance. Important to have all of them, but one form of insurance we don't always consider: food insurance. Like every other kind of insurance, you hope you never need it, but when you do, you want to come through for you and your family. And this insurance comes in the form of emergency prepared foods. No one does it better than My Patriot Supply. Food security at its core at My Patriot Supply. 3-month emergency food kit. You can get hooked up at preparewithclayandbuck.com. This is 3 months worth of meals, breakfast, lunch, dinner, 2,000 calories a day. When you order, you'll save $200 on each kit you need. Easy to order. Go to preparewithclayandbuck.com. Fast and free shipping. Order your 3-month emergency food kit today. Save $200 per kit. Do it today while you're thinking about it, knowing these kits can last 20 years or more. We have them in the Travis household. One for me, one for the wife, one for all 3 kids. Prepare with ClayandBuck.com.
Sunday Hang with Clay and Buck, a new podcast. Find it on the iHeart app or wherever you get your podcasts.